Elias had always believed that a kind heart was richer than any pocket full of coins. He was a simple farmer who lived in a small village near the edge of the dry desert in the southwest. His house was not big or fancy. It was made of sun-baked mud bricks and had a roof that let the golden sunlight in every morning. Every day the wind carried the smell of dry earth and the sound of birds waking up filled the air. Life was hard, but it was quiet and honest. Elias was not a young man, but he wasn't old either. He had lines on his face that showed how many days he had spent under the sun, working in the fields. His hands were strong but rough, marked by years of farming. Every morning before the first ray of light touched the earth, he would rise from his simple wooden bed, say a short prayer of thanks, and step outside to start his work. His farm was small, a few rows of crops and a single mule that had been with him for many years. Yet to Elias, that small piece of land was his world. He was not a man of big dreams. He didn't want gold or great riches. He only wanted enough to feed his family, keep his land alive, and sleep peacefully at night. People in the village respected him because he was honest and always ready to help. If a neighbor needed water, he shared it. If someone was short on grain, he would give what little he had. Many people called him the kind farmer, and though he never asked for thanks, their words warmed his heart. But that year had been harder than most. The rain hadn't come for many weeks, and the soil was dry like dust. Crops grew slower, and many farmers lost their harvest. Elias had been saving every little bit he could, trying to make sure his children would have food when winter came. His wife had passed away years ago, so he carried all the weight of responsibility alone. His children, 2 boys and a little girl, looked up to him as their only pillar of hope. He worked harder than anyone else because he loved them more than anything in the world. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in deep orange and soft gold, Elias decided to walk to the small market in the next village. He had 1 single coin in his pocket. It was all that remained of his savings for the week. With that coin, he planned to buy a small sack of grain so his children could have warm bread for the next few days. As he walked down the dusty road, the sound of his old boots crunching the sand mixed with the soft whistle of the wind. The road to the market was long, but Elias liked it. It gave him time to think. He thought about his children's laughter, the way they ran around their little house even when there wasn't much to eat. He thought about his wife's smile, how she used to sing while cooking and how her voice filled the home with joy. Sometimes he missed her so much that he wished he could hear just one more song, but instead of letting sadness take over, he turned those memories into strength. The sun was still high when he reached the middle of the road. That was where people often rested under the old cottonwood tree. The tree had been there longer than anyone could remember. Its thick branches gave shade to tired travelers, and its leaves danced softly in the warm breeze. Elias slowed down as he approached it. He wasn't alone this time. There, sitting near the tree, was a woman wrapped in a faded blanket. Her skin was bronze from the sun, and her long black hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She was clearly from the Apache tribe that lived in the hills beyond the desert. Her face was thin and her eyes told a story without words. They were full of tiredness, of pain, and something deeper, something like quiet hope and fear mixed together. She wasn't holding anything. She didn't have food, water, or even shoes on her feet. She looked lost, like someone who had walked too far with nowhere else to go. Elias slowed his steps. He was not a man who judged people by where they came from. He knew that pain didn't choose who it visited. Some travelers avoided strangers. Some turned their heads and walked away. But Elias wasn't like them. He believed every soul deserved kindness. The woman looked up at him as he passed. For a moment their eyes met, and in that single glance Elias saw something he would never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was the quiet, trembling look of someone who had not eaten in days and who had been hurt not by people, but by the world itself. Her lips were dry, and her voice was almost a whisper when she spoke. "Please, don't spend money on me," she said softly. Her voice cracked like dry leaves. She wasn't begging for help. She was begging him not to give it. Elias froze where he stood. He wasn't expecting her to say that. Most people who were hungry or tired would ask for something. A coin, a piece of bread, or a drink of water. But she didn't ask for anything. Instead, she told him not to help. It confused him, and it touched something deep inside his heart. He took a small step closer. Her hands were resting in her lap, shaking slightly from the cold wind that had started to blow. Her eyes were shiny with tears she was trying to hold back. She looked like someone who had learned to accept pain as part of life. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. Elias could tell she had been sitting there for hours, maybe even days. Her feet were dusty and her clothes were worn out. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. His voice was warm, the kind that made people feel safe. She lowered her head and didn't answer right away. The silence between them stretched like a thin string. Finally, she said, "Please, keep your money. I'm not worth it. Your family needs it more." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. How could someone who had nothing still care about someone else's needs? Her words were soft but heavy. He could feel her pain in every syllable. This was not just about hunger. This was about dignity, about a life where she had been pushed to the edge too many times. Elias had always believed that kindness was like water. Even a single drop could bring life to dry ground. But now, as he stood before her, with his only coin in his pocket, he realized kindness wasn't always easy. His children were waiting at home. They needed food. This one coin could mean bread for 3 days, but this woman sitting under the tree, she needed more than just bread. She needed hope. She needed someone to see her as a human being, not just a stranger. He felt the weight of the coin in his pocket as if it were made of stone. He thought of his children's faces, how their eyes shined even when their plates were nearly empty. He thought of their laughter, their innocence, and how they trusted him to keep them safe. He thought of his wife's last words, whispered to him years ago when she was still alive. "Never let your heart grow small. Elias, even when the world does." The sun was lower now, casting long shadows on the road. Elias didn't know why, but he couldn't walk past the woman. Something about her quiet strength, her pain, and her soft plea touched a place inside him he hadn't felt in a long time. He walked closer and knelt down so he could see her face clearly. Her cheeks were wet with quiet tears she didn't try to hide anymore. "You are worth it," he said softly. She shook her head weakly. "No, you don't even know me. You should take care of your children." "Not me." Elias gave a small, gentle smile. "Kindness doesn't need to know a name," he replied. "Hunger looks the same in every language." For a moment, they just sat there under the old cottonwood tree, listening to the wind and the sound of leaves moving. The world seemed to grow quiet around them, as if it was watching this small, simple moment. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like nothing more than a farmer and a tired woman resting. But to Elias, it was more. It was a test of the kind of man he had chosen to be all his life. The woman lowered her head, ashamed of her tears. She wasn't used to kindness. She wasn't used to being seen as more than a burden. Elias could see that. He didn't ask her where she came from or why she was here. He didn't ask for explanations or stories. Sometimes he knew pain didn't need questions. It needed someone to care without asking why. Elias gently reached into his pocket and touched the small worn coin. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a fortune, but it was everything he had left. In that moment, the weight of the coin felt lighter than the weight of walking away. And as the cool breeze touched their faces, Elias understood something simple but powerful. When life gives you only one coin, it is how you choose to spend it that tells the world who you truly are. Elias stood quietly under the old cottonwood tree, the sun slowly dipping lower in the sky. The light had turned soft and golden, spreading a warm glow across the dusty road. The air was still except for the gentle rustle of the leaves above their heads. In that quiet space, it felt as if the whole world had paused to listen. The woman still sat with her knees pulled close, her hands resting on the faded blanket around her. Her words were still fresh in Elias's heart. "Don't spend money on me." Those words were not said with anger. They were said with pain, a pain that came from many years of being unseen, unheard, and left behind. Elias had heard many things in his life, but something about those words felt different. They were the kind of words that stay with a person long after they are spoken. He looked at the single coin in his hand. It was a small coin, dull from years of use. To anyone else it might not have meant much, but to Elias it was everything. It was the sack of grain he had promised his children. It was their bread for the next few days. It was warmth and comfort in a world that had given him very little. But now that same coin had become something heavier than gold. It had turned into a question, a quiet, difficult question. Should he keep the coin and walk away, or give it to the woman who sat in front of him, trembling in the cool evening air? He thought about his children again. He could see their faces in his mind. His eldest son, Thomas, who was only 10 but already tried to help on the farm. His second son, Matteo, who loved to chase butterflies in the field, and his little daughter Rosa, with her bright eyes and soft laugh that always reminded Elias of spring even in the driest season. They trusted him. Every evening when he walked home from the market, their faces would light up with hope. He could not forget that. He took a slow breath and sat down on the ground a few steps away from the woman. The road was quiet and a soft breeze passed between them. Elias did not want to rush. He knew that some decisions should not be made quickly. They needed time, like seeds needing rain before they can grow. The woman turned her head slightly toward him but didn't speak. Her hands were shaking less now, but her eyes still looked tired. She looked like someone who had spent many nights sleeping outside under the stars, without warmth or comfort. She was not begging. She was simply existing, waiting for the world to pass her by. Elias gently spoke, his voice calm. "Do you have somewhere to go?" She shook her head. "Do you have family waiting for you?" he asked softly. Her eyes filled with tears that she didn't let fall. "No," she whispered. "No one waits for me anymore." Her answer was like a quiet wind that passed through Elias's heart. He had lost people too. He knew what it felt like to have no one waiting. It was a feeling that stayed with a person, like a shadow that never truly left. He didn't ask any more questions. He didn't want to open wounds she had spent her life trying to close. Instead, he looked at the coin again. It sat in his hand like a little circle of light and weight. His fingers closed around it, then opened again. Elias remembered a day from many years ago when he was a young boy. He and his father were walking through the same dusty road after a long day of work. They had no extra money, no fine clothes, no soft beds. But his father had seen an old man sitting near the road with no shoes, tired and cold. Without thinking twice, his father had given away his only blanket that night. Elias had asked him why. His father had smiled and said, "Son, kindness is not measured by what you have, but by what you give when you have the least." That memory returned now like a warm light inside his chest. Elias realized his father had faced the same kind of moment, the same quiet test, and now it was his turn. The woman must have seen something in his eyes because she spoke again, a little louder this time. "Please," she said, "keep your coin. I don't want it. You have children. You need it more. I've already taken too much from the world." Her words surprised Elias. She wasn't only tired. She had lost something far greater, hope. People who still had hope asked for help, but people who had lost hope asked others not to help. Elias's heart ached for her. How many times had she been turned away? How many times had she sat by the road and watched people walk past without even looking at her? He could imagine it clearly. People clutching their coins tighter, telling themselves they couldn't afford to help, or pretending not to hear her quiet whispers. He understood why she felt she wasn't worth it. The world had told her that many times, even if not in words. The sun was now low on the horizon, and the sky had turned a soft pink and gold. Elias knew he had to decide soon. He couldn't stay there forever. He slowly got to his feet, brushing the dust from his trousers, and took a step closer to the woman. She lifted her head and their eyes met again. She expected him to walk away. Most people did. But Elias didn't move toward the road. Instead, he knelt down in front of her so that his face was at the same level as hers. "Do you know something?" he said gently. "When my wife was alive, she used to tell me that the world is like a field. Sometimes it is dry and empty, and sometimes with just a little water it grows again. I don't have much water to give, but I have a little, and sometimes a little is enough." She looked at him with wide eyes as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time. Elias opened his hand and the small coin shone softly in the fading light. It wasn't much, but in that moment it felt like the most important thing in the world. His fingers curled around it again. His heart was beating slowly but heavily in his chest. He thought of Thomas, Matteo, and Rosa again. He thought of their tiny hands holding warm bread, their laughter filling their small house. But then he thought of what kind of father they believed he was. A kind father, a man who helped people, a man who stood for what was good. He wanted them to grow up not only with bread in their stomachs but with kindness in their hearts. He whispered to himself, "Some lessons are worth more than a sack of grain." The woman didn't hear him, but she could see the softness in his eyes. She looked down again, whispering, "I told you not to spend it on me. Please, I don't want to take your children's food. But Elias shook his head slowly. This is not about taking. This is about giving. And giving is something no one can take away from a person. The wind grew cooler and the sky deepened into a soft orange glow. A few travelers passed by on the other side of the road. Some glanced at them curious, but no one stopped. They kept walking, lost in their own worries, their own small worlds. Elias barely noticed them. His world had narrowed down to this moment, to this woman, and to the coin in his hand. He thought about how the world worked. People often waited for big chances to show kindness. They waited for extra time, extra money, extra energy. But the truth was, the real beauty of kindness showed up in small, quiet moments, when it cost something. Elias realized this was one of those moments. The woman lifted her eyes again and spoke in a trembling voice. "Why are you doing this?" Elias gave her a small, warm smile. "Because someone once helped me when I thought I wasn't worth it either." That was the truth. Years ago, when he had lost everything in a bad harvest, an old neighbor had given him seeds and water without asking for anything in return. That act had saved his family. It had reminded him that good people still existed. Now it was his turn to pass that kindness on. The wind carried the scent of dry earth mixed with the faint smell of nearby cooking fires. Night was approaching. Elias knew the world might never remember this moment. No one would write it in a book or tell it in a speech, but that didn't matter. Some of the most powerful stories are written in silence, in the small actions that no one sees. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the cool air on his face. Then he opened them again and looked at the woman. She was still shaking her head slightly, not because she didn't need help, but because she had forgotten what it felt like to receive it. Elias could see a tiny spark in her eyes now, so small it might have been easy to miss. But it was there, the first spark of someone remembering what hope felt like. And right then, as the last light of the sun touched their faces, Elias made up his mind. Elias stood in silence, feeling the soft wind brush against his face. The air was cooler now, and the last light of the sun stretched long and golden across the road. The woman sat quietly beneath the cottonwood tree, her hands still resting on her lap, her blanket wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders. The world around them felt both quiet and loud at the same time. Quiet because no one spoke, and loud because Elias could hear the sound of his own thoughts so clearly inside his head. He looked down at the coin resting in his palm. It was just a small circle of metal, nothing more, but in that moment it felt heavier than a stone. That coin was food. That coin was warmth. That coin was everything he had left for the week. He imagined the faces of his children once again. Tomas with his quiet strength, Mateo with his endless energy, and Rosa with her gentle laughter. He could almost hear their voices in the wind calling him home. He pictured the way their eyes lit up whenever he returned from the market with something to eat. He could almost smell the bread baking in the small clay oven they had built together. But then his eyes returned to the woman. She was still staring at the ground as if she didn't believe she was allowed to look up anymore. There was something about her that broke his heart in a way he couldn't explain. She wasn't just tired. She looked like someone who had carried a weight for a very long time, a weight so heavy that even hope had grown quiet inside her. She didn't ask him for the coin. She didn't beg. She didn't reach out her hand. Instead, she asked him not to give. That, Elias thought, was what made it so hard. He shifted his weight from one foot to another and let out a slow breath. He remembered the words of his father again. When kindness costs nothing, it's easy. When kindness costs something, it shows who you really are. This was one of those moments. His mind was full of questions. What if he gave the coin away and his children went hungry? What if the weather stayed dry and there was no money left for seeds? What if kindness came at a price he couldn't afford? But then another voice rose inside him. A softer one. A voice that sounded almost like his wife's, the way she used to speak to him in the early mornings when everything was quiet. A good heart is never wasted, Elias, she used to say. Even when it hurts, kindness finds its way back to you. He sighed and sat down on the ground near the woman, letting his tired legs rest. She turned her head slightly, surprised that he didn't just walk away like most people. For a long moment they said nothing. The only sound was the leaves whispering above their heads. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, like two souls who didn't need many words to understand something deep. "Why do you say you're not worth it?" Elias asked softly after a while. The woman didn't answer at first. Her fingers traced the edge of the old blanket as if she was searching for courage in the threads. "Because," she finally whispered, "the world has told me that over and over. When people look at me, they don't see a person anymore. They just see someone who doesn't belong." Her words were gentle, but they cut through the quiet like a soft knife through cloth. Elias didn't need to know the details. He didn't need to ask what had happened. Those few words were enough to tell him that life had not been kind to her. She had lived through many doors closing, many faces turning away. He could hear it in her voice, the sound of someone who had learned to live with emptiness. Elias lowered his eyes to the coin again. He turned it between his fingers slowly, the metal catching the last golden light. He remembered how hard he had worked for that small coin. Early mornings, long hours in the sun, aching muscles, cracked hands. Every coin he earned came from sweat and hard work. But he also remembered how many times others had helped him when he had nothing. A neighbor lending him tools, a friend sharing seeds, a stranger offering him water on a long road. Those moments had built his life more than the coins ever did. He looked at the woman again. Her eyes were tired, but in them he could still see a quiet strength. The kind of strength that doesn't come from comfort, but from surviving everything that tries to break a person. She reminded him of the land he worked on. Dry, tired, but still holding on, still waiting for a drop of kindness like dry earth waits for rain. Elias felt torn in two directions. One part of him wanted to hold the coin tightly, turn away and keep walking. His children needed him. They depended on him. He could go home, bake the bread, and pretend this moment never happened. No one would know. No one would judge him. It would be the easy choice. But another part of him, the one that had guided his steps since he was a boy, whispered to him quietly, "Do not walk away from kindness. It's the only thing that makes the world softer." The woman spoke again, her voice even softer now, as if she was afraid it might disappear into the wind. "I know what it means to be hungry," she said. "I don't want your children to feel that because of me." Elias felt his throat tighten. How could someone with nothing still worry about his children? How could she think of others when her own stomach was empty? That was the moment he realized something powerful. Kindness isn't always about giving. Sometimes kindness is found in the way people still care, even when they have nothing left. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, and stared at the coin resting in his palm. The sun finally dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and purple. The first cool breath of evening touched their faces. A cart passed slowly on the road, pulled by a tired horse. A family walked behind it, carrying bags and baskets. No one stopped, but Elias barely noticed them. The whole world had narrowed down to this small space, a farmer, a woman, and a single coin between them. Elias thought of what kind of story this moment might become. Maybe no one would ever talk about it. Maybe the world would move on as if it never happened, but he knew he would remember. He would remember the look in the woman's eyes. He would remember the sound of her trembling voice. He would remember how one small choice could weigh heavier than a lifetime of work. His heart beat slowly. His hands felt warm, and then came the struggle, not between right and wrong, but between need and hope. It wasn't easy. It never was. People like Elias worked for every little thing they had. Giving away the last coin meant stepping into uncertainty. But what he also knew deep inside was that not giving might leave a different kind of emptiness, the kind that doesn't fill up easily. The woman whispered again, "Please don't. I'll be fine." I've always been fine, but Elias could hear it in her voice, and she wasn't fine. She had never truly been fine. She was just used to pretending. He lifted his eyes slowly to meet hers. There was something about the way she looked at him, not with expectation, but with quiet acceptance. It was as if she had already prepared herself to be forgotten again. She didn't want to take anything. She just didn't want to be a burden. And maybe, Elias thought, the greatest gift wasn't the coin itself. It was letting someone know they still mattered. He rubbed the coin between his fingers one last time. The metal was cool against his skin. The memory of his children flickered in his mind again, but this time it was different. He imagined telling them this story when they were older. He imagined Thomas growing up to be a kind man, Mateo helping a stranger without fear, Rosa smiling at someone who needed a little light in their day. What would he want them to remember about their father? That he held on to a coin, or that he gave it away with an open heart? The night sky deepened. A few stars appeared faintly above them. The world was quiet. The decision he was about to make wasn't easy, but it was becoming clear. He straightened his back and closed his fingers around the coin, feeling its edges pressed gently against his skin. The woman lowered her gaze again, believing he was about to leave. She had seen that moment too many times before. People always left, but Elias didn't stand up. He stayed there, breathing slowly, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the leaves. He felt the struggle settle inside him like a storm finally finding its end. The choice was made, not by his mind but by his heart. The stars had begun to peek gently through the soft purple of the evening sky. The cottonwood tree above them whispered softly in the wind, as if nature itself was waiting for something to happen. The road had grown quiet, the last travelers passing by and disappearing into the distance. The woman sat beneath the tree, still wrapped in her faded blanket, her eyes lowered to the ground. She believed deep inside that Elias would walk away. Everyone always did. Elias remained still for a long time. His fingers closed around the single coin so tightly that he could feel the cold edge pressing into his palm. His thoughts were like waves in his mind, crashing back and forth. One wave told him to keep the coin, to protect his family, to do what most people would call the right thing. The other wave, quieter but stronger, told him to give, to follow the path of his heart, the same path that had guided him since he was young. He breathed slowly, letting the air fill his chest. The sound of the wind was gentle. It almost felt as if the world had gone silent just to hear the decision he was about to make. In that silence, he remembered the day his first child was born. He remembered holding tiny Thomas in his arms, promising silently to become the kind of man his children would be proud to call their father. He remembered the last words of his wife, telling him to keep his heart soft even when life became hard. Those memories wrapped around him like a quiet voice reminding him who he was. Elias looked at the woman again. She still hadn't moved. Her shoulders were small and fragile, but there was a kind of quiet strength in the way she held herself. She wasn't begging, she wasn't demanding. She was simply existing, as if she had already accepted her place in the world. Elias knew that feeling, the feeling of being invisible. And he also knew that sometimes, the smallest act of kindness could make a person feel seen again. He slowly opened his hand and looked at the coin resting in his palm. It wasn't much. It wasn't gold or silver, just a small dull coin that he had earned with days of work under the hot sun. Yet at that moment it felt like something far more important than its worth. This coin carried the weight of choice. With a deep breath, Elias stood up. The woman glanced up for a moment, surprised by the movement. She thought it was the moment he would turn and walk away. Her heart braced itself for the familiar emptiness of being left behind. But Elias didn't walk away. He walked toward her slowly, each step sure and calm. His boots made soft sounds in the dust. When he stood in front of her, he knelt down so their eyes were at the same level. The woman didn't know what to say. She lowered her gaze again, almost afraid to look at the kindness in his eyes. She had seen disappointment too many times before. Elias extended his hand gently toward her. The small coin lay in the center of his palm, glowing faintly in the last light of the day. "Take it," he said softly. His voice wasn't loud or grand. It was warm, like a quiet promise. Her eyes widened. "No," she whispered quickly. "Please don't. I told you not to. You have children. You need it." Elias didn't move his hand away. "I know what I have," he said gently. "And I know what I want to give. Sometimes when life gives you very little, that little becomes even more meaningful." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she shook her head. "I can't take it. I don't want to be the reason your family goes hungry." "You won't be," Elias replied. "This coin isn't just food. It's a choice. And I choose to give." The woman's lips trembled. She didn't understand it. She had seen people hold tightly to much more than a coin and still refuse to help. Yet here was a man who had almost nothing, offering it without hesitation. Her heart felt both heavy and light at the same time, heavy with the weight of kindness she didn't believe she deserved, and light with the warmth that had been missing from her life for too long. Elias moved his hand a little closer. "When I was a boy," he said softly, "someone gave me something when I had nothing. They didn't know my name. They didn't ask for anything, but their kindness saved me. Now it's my turn. Maybe it won't change the world, but maybe it will change this moment for you." The woman covered her mouth with one hand, holding back her tears. Her heart had grown so used to silence that it didn't know how to accept kindness. She whispered almost to herself, "Why are you doing this for me?" Elias gave a gentle smile, a tired but honest one. "Because I can," he said. "Because your life matters as much as mine." For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. The wind quieted. The stars grew brighter in the darkening sky. It was a simple moment, yet it carried more weight than 1,000 grand speeches. Finally, with shaking fingers, the woman reached out slowly. Her hand hovered over the coin for a few seconds, as if she still wasn't sure if she deserved it. Elias didn't rush her. He waited patiently, his hand steady and open. When her fingers finally touched the coin, her breath caught in her chest. The cool metal against her skin felt real in a way that kindness often didn't. She closed her hand around the coin carefully, as if it were the most delicate thing in the world. It wasn't just money to her. It was a reminder that there were still people who saw her, who didn't look away. Tears began to fall down her cheeks. Not loud sobs, just quiet, steady tears that she no longer tried to hide. She whispered again, "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of being unseen. Elias gently placed his hand over hers for a brief second, not to hold her but to let her know he meant every word. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "We all need a little kindness sometimes." The woman nodded slowly, her lips still trembling. She had spent so many years feeling like a shadow, unseen and unheard, but in this moment she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: dignity. The coin might have been small, but the kindness behind it was bigger than anything she had known in years. Elias stood up slowly. His body ached from a long day, but his heart felt strangely lighter. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he would find another coin soon. But he knew one thing for sure. He would be able to look his children in the eyes and tell them a story about the night their father gave away everything he had, not out of weakness, but out of strength. The woman clutched the coin close to her chest as if it were more than just metal. To her it was a seed, not one that would grow crops, but one that would grow hope. It was proof that kindness still existed, even in dusty roads under tired skies. "May the wind guide you safely," Elias said gently as he adjusted his hat and prepared to walk home. "May kindness follow you always," she whispered back, her voice shaky but full of something warm. Elias began to walk down the road, the sound of his boots soft against the earth. He felt the cool air brush against his skin, and for the first time in many days he didn't feel the heaviness of worry pressing down on him. He felt light, free. His pocket was empty, but his heart was full. Behind him, the woman sat quietly under the tree, holding the coin close to her heart. She watched the farmer disappear into the fading light, and for the first time in years she whispered a prayer, not asking for something, but giving thanks for the kindness of a stranger. As Elias walked further, he looked up at the sky. The stars above seemed brighter, as if they were watching and silently approving. He thought about his children, about how he would look at them when he got home. He didn't have the sack of grain he had planned to buy, but he carried something more important, a story, a lesson, a reminder. He imagined Thomas asking, "Papa, where's the bread?" And he imagined telling them, "Tonight we shared it with someone who needed it more." He imagined Rosa's soft eyes and Mateo's curious face, and he knew in his heart that they would understand. Maybe not today, but one day they would. As the night deepened, Elias reached the path that led to his small home. The wind was cooler now, but it didn't feel harsh. It felt gentle, as if wrapping him in something soft. His steps were slow but sure, and in his heart, something beautiful bloomed quietly. The feeling that he had done the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. Back beneath the cottonwood tree, the woman pressed the coin into her hands and closed her eyes. For the first time in many, many nights, she didn't feel alone. A stranger's kindness had lit a small light inside her, and though it was only a tiny spark, she knew it would keep her warm through the darkness. The night was quiet when Elias finally reached the edge of his small farm. The stars above him were bright, scattered across the sky like tiny lamps. The air smelled of earth, cool and calm, and the old wooden gate creaked softly as he pushed it open. The house looked the same as it always did, humble with walls made of mud bricks and a roof that had survived many storms. But inside his heart, something was different. He felt a soft warmth spreading through him, as if the night itself was proud of what he had done. The door opened, and little Rosa came running to him with her small feet making soft sounds on the floor. "Papa!" she called out, her arms stretching toward him. Thomas and Matteo followed close behind, their faces glowing with the light of the small oil lamp inside. They had waited for him just like every night. Elias bent down and hugged Rosa tightly, kissing the top of her head. Her hair smelled like the warm air of the fields. Thomas and Matteo looked at him eagerly, expecting to see the sack of grain he usually carried. But his hands were empty. Thomas's smile faded slightly, though he didn't ask. He was a quiet boy who understood more than he ever said. Matteo tilted his head, confused. Rosa simply wrapped her little arms around his leg. Elias sat down slowly on the small wooden chair near the table. The children gathered around him. He didn't want their faces to fall with worry, so he gave them a small, gentle smile, the kind of smile that said everything was still all right. The flickering light from the lamp danced across the room, making the shadows look like soft waves on the wall. Matteo finally asked, "Papa, where is the bread?" Elias looked at their young faces. He thought of the woman sitting under the cottonwood tree, of her quiet tears, and of the coin resting in her hands. He thought of the way the stars looked brighter as he walked home. This was a story they needed to hear, not about hunger but about kindness. So he took a slow breath and said, "Tonight, something special happened." The children leaned closer. Rosa climbed onto his lap. Tomas sat cross-legged on the floor, and Matteo rested his chin on his hands, ready to listen. Elias began to tell them the story, not in grand words, but in simple, soft ones. He told them how he had walked down the dusty road, how he had seen the woman sitting under the old cottonwood tree, how she had told him not to spend money on her, and how he had felt the weight of the coin in his hand. He told them about the moment he decided to give, and about the tears that fell down her face when kindness finally touched her heart. Tomas's eyes grew wide. Matteo didn't say a word. Rosa laid her small head on his chest, listening to the rhythm of his voice. When Elias finished, the room was silent. The children didn't look sad. Instead, their eyes were full of something soft and shining, something even warmer than the light of the lamp. It was understanding. Thomas finally spoke. "Papa," he said quietly, "will she be okay now?" Elias placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "I don't know everything," he said gently. "But I know this. Sometimes one kind act can give a person hope to keep going. And hope is powerful." Matteo looked thoughtful. "But Papa, we don't have bread tonight." Elias smiled softly. "No," he said. "But tonight we shared something else, something bigger than bread. We shared kindness. And kindness feeds the heart." The children didn't complain. They were young, but they understood more than words could explain. Thomas nodded slowly. Rosa wrapped her little arms around her father's neck, and Matteo rested his head on his father's knee. The night was still, but it felt full of something invisible, but strong. The next morning, Elias woke up early as always. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the fields with a soft golden light. He walked outside to tend to the soil. He expected the day to be like any other, but something felt different inside him. His steps felt lighter. Even though his hands were empty, his heart was full. He didn't regret giving the coin, not even for a second. As he watered the dry soil with what little water he had, he whispered to the ground, "Kindness always comes back one way or another." Days passed. Life continued. Elias worked on the farm. The children played in the fields, and the sun rose and set like it always did. But the memory of that night stayed with him like a warm light that never faded. Sometimes when he passed by the cottonwood tree on his way to the market, he would slow down and look at the spot where she had sat. It reminded him that kindness didn't need to be loud. It only needed to be real. Then one crisp morning, something unexpected happened. Elias was in the field working with his old mule when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw a group of Apache people walking toward his farm. They were dressed in traditional woven clothing, their steps quiet and steady. At first, Elias thought they were just passing by, but they stopped at his gate. One of the elders, a tall man with gentle eyes, stepped forward and greeted Elias with a respectful nod. "You are Elias, the farmer?" the man asked. Elias wiped his hands on his trousers and nodded. "Yes, sir," he replied softly. The elder's voice was calm and steady. "You helped someone from our tribe," he said. "You gave when you had almost nothing. She is our daughter." Elias was surprised. He didn't expect anyone to know what he had done. He didn't give the coin for thanks or reward. He gave it because it felt right. "I only did what I could," he said quietly. The elder smiled, a warm, deep smile that carried gratitude without needing many words. And that is what makes it special. Behind the elder, several women stepped forward. They carried baskets wrapped in colorful woven cloth. One by one, they placed them near Elias's feet. Inside were things he hadn't seen in months: fresh corn, beans, flour, fruits, and a small bag of seeds. His children, who had been playing nearby, ran to his side with wide eyes. The elder looked at Elias kindly. "We do not forget kindness," he said. "One coin may be small, but a kind heart is great. What you gave that night gave her hope to live. She found her way home because of you, and because of that we wanted to give something back." Elias stood there, his throat tightening with emotion. He hadn't expected anything in return. But standing there, watching these people bring their gratitude to his doorstep, he felt the truth of what he had always believed. Kindness doesn't disappear. It travels, it grows, and it returns in ways you can never predict. Tomas, Mateo, and Rosa stared at the baskets with shining eyes. Rosa whispered softly, "Papa, it's like the kindness came back." Elias knelt down beside her and smiled. "Yes, little one," he said. "That's how kindness works. It always finds its way home." That evening, the house was filled with the smell of warm bread baking in the oven. For the first time in weeks, they had more than enough to eat. Elias sat at the table with his children, and they shared a meal that tasted richer than any feast. Not because of the food, but because of what it represented. It wasn't just a meal. It was a circle of kindness completed. As the children laughed softly around the table, Elias looked toward the window. Outside, the night sky was full of stars, just like the night he gave away his coin. The cottonwood tree stood tall in the distance, and a soft wind brushed through the fields. He thought about the woman and hoped that wherever she was, she felt the warmth of the kindness she had received. In the days that followed, Elias became known among the nearby villages not for his wealth, because he had none, but for his heart. People spoke quietly about the farmer who gave his last coin to a woman no one else saw. They told the story not because it was grand, but because it was real. And real kindness has a way of traveling far and touching many hearts. Tomas grew up remembering that story. He would tell it to his own children one day, not as a tale about poverty or need, but as a lesson about giving. Mateo carried it in his heart too, learning that strength wasn't in holding on to everything, but in letting go when someone else needed it more. Rosa, who had heard the story from her father's lap, grew up with the gentleness of that night shaping her own kindness toward others. And Elias? He never forgot the woman under the cottonwood tree. Sometimes, when the evening sky turned gold and the wind whispered through the leaves, he would walk to the road, stand beneath the tree, and smile. He didn't need to see her again to know the moment had changed something. For her, for him, for everyone who heard the story later. His life didn't suddenly become easy. The farm was still small. Work was still hard. There were still dry seasons and long days. But inside him, something remained steady, a quiet flame of kindness that no storm could blow out. He carried that warmth with him every day, in every step, in every seed he planted. Years later, People would remember the story of Elias the farmer, not because he was rich or powerful or famous. They remembered him because one evening under a quiet tree, he chose to give everything he had to a stranger. That small act of kindness grew like a seed into something bigger than anyone could have imagined. And so, the story of Elias and the Apache woman lived on, not written in books but carried in hearts. A story of how one coin, given with love, could light up more than just one life. It could light up generations.